Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the 2018 Animal Science and Forage webinar series. Our webinar this month is going to be given by Courteney Holland, who is our equine extension specialist, and she's going to be visiting with us a little bit today about the nutritional requirements of horses. So if you're joining us for the first time, we will have a time for questions at the end of the presentation, but we would ask you to go ahead and mute your mic so that we don't get any background feedback during the presentation. Again, at the end of the presentation, we'll have a time for live questions. And if you're viewing the archive of this presentation online later, you can go to alabamabeefsystems.com for additional information. So with that, I'll go ahead and introduce Courteney.
Thank you, Kim. So today, if I can get this thing going, there we go. So today I'm going to be talking about just kind of basic equine nutrition. I'm going to start out with digestive limitations of the horse and some feeding principles, and then I'll move into forage quality and then into weight management. So I'm starting with digestive limitations because I feel like this kind of is the most important thing with horses because they are so different. They're not cows. We can't feed them like cows. I wish we could. You know, we always say they look for a place to die. And usually when that happens, when we have problems with horses or complications, it is digestion related. So I wanted to spend a little time on that to begin with. So horses are non-ruminant herbivores. They're hindgut fermenters, whereas cows are foregut fermenters. I sure do wish horses were foregut fermenters, but they're not. And this kind of sets us up for trouble already. They're limited in the amount of feed they're able to take in. Their stomachs are tiny, tiny, tiny. They have a capacity of 2 to 4 gallons. And I'll go into some management principles that address that in just a little while. They're unable to regurgitate, and this is a huge issue. You know, us humans, when we get sick or if we swallow something not so good, we can, get rid of it, and horses cannot do that. So once it's down, it's down. Choking is not uncommon for horses. Fortunately, their airway is not shut off when they choke. It's just an esophageal obstruction. But their esophagus is mostly one-way peristalsis. So what that means is their muscles are contracting downward. They're pushing the food down. And it really has a hard time coming back up. Also, their esophageal sphincter shuts off once they swallow something. It keeps it from going into the pharynx area. So this is not an uncommon. This is not a uncommon problem. Choking happens quite often. Also, horses are trickle feeders. They can graze 12 to 16 hours per day, and that kind of goes along with they have to have small meals. Another thing about the horse is they do not have a gallbladder. They're not as efficient with consuming fat, but they can digest up to 20% of fat in their diet. However, it does take a little while. It takes up to 3 weeks for them to actually adjust to this and use it efficiently, not having a gallbladder. Their small intestine is 50 to 70 feet long. That's huge. And this is where most nutrients are digested. And this is kind of an issue because it being 70 feet long, a lot of things can happen. Kinks can happen. Gas pockets can happen. Lots of issues. This is kind of our prime area for colic, and then down into the cecum as well as large intestine. So this is where colic happens. And honestly, this is the site where all the problems begin, is the small intestine, because if they have a carbohydrate overload, if their diet is switched too abruptly, the small intestine is getting hit with all that carb overload, and it's setting the horse up for failure, basically. I'll get into more details of that in just a second. So just some feeding guidelines to kind of go with those unique aspects of the horse. One thing that helps to avoid some of these problems that were just discussed is forage first. And as horse owners, we're really bad to think about the concentrate and the commercial feeds first and not really worry about our forage. We tend to want to save money on the forage end and spend more on the supplement and concentrate end. And we really should not be operating that way. It's not promoting good horse health. So forage first always. You'll notice this pyramid. So we need to build our program around forages. We need to know the quality of our forages, whether it's the pasture or the hay. And then we need to meet their needs there first, and then go from there, and we can fill in the blanks with the supplement, and then go from there. If we're not meeting the vitamin and mineral recommendations, then go from there and fill in the blanks. So next, horses eat at a rate of 2.5% of their body weight. This can fluctuate just a little bit depending on what they're doing. It can be in the 2 to 3% range. Some horses that are just at maintenance and not doing anything, kind of easy keepers, not really high strung, will stay in the 1.5% range. Always feed by weight, not by volume. I don't know what a Folgers can of feed means. You need to weigh it. We're all guilty of it. We all, kind of just eyeball things. But when you're really trying to manage your horse's weight, let's say you have a performance horse, and it's very important that you keep him fit and in shape and of good flesh. It's important to weigh your feed and know the quality of it and know what you're feeding your horse. If you have a backyard horse and it's fine and it's healthy and you don't know how much you're feeding it, but it's going along fine, all is good, don't fix what's not broke. So don't worry about it there. But when it comes to putting weight on horses or managing performance horses or managing breeding stock, this is very important. Kind of going back to their small stomach issue, another thing, each concentrate meal should not exceed 0.5% body weight per feeding. So feed small multiple meals. It's okay to feed breakfast, lunch, and dinner to a horse that might need extra energy during the day, extra calories. If you're trying to put weight on them, you're going to put weight on them a lot faster if you break up those feedings into smaller meals. Yes, it's a pain. It stinks. It's hard to do. But if you're really trying and you're really wanting to put weight on them, that's just the way to go. So they are not built to handle huge meals. That's just, again, you're setting that horse up for a lot of complications. Also, with changing feeds, and this our rule of thumb is over a 3-week period. If you know your horse and you've changed feeds with them before, I understand that a lot of us can get away with doing it during in a week's time. I understand that, but if you have a higher risk horse, or if you have a horse that's maybe geriatric or just has some health problems, it's best to go by the rule of thumb, the 3-week period. And this is mainly for feeds that, let's say you're going from a 14% protein feed to a 10%. That's a big jump. So it's pretty important to do this 3-week period. Go by this rule. If you're just going from, the same protein content, same energy, kind of same all around, but you're kind of changing just different feed companies, I wouldn't say that the 3-week thing is necessary, but I'd still gradually change at least within a week. So just that's where common sense has to be used. Next, one of those kind of weird things about horses is the calcium phosphorus ratio. It's really important to follow this rule. You need approximately 2 parts calcium to 1 part phosphorus. So if you're just feeding, let's say, just an example, an all alfalfa diet, alfalfa can be high in calcium. And sometimes you can end up feeding a 6-part calcium to 1 part phosphorus diet, and you can start seeing a lot of complications in your horse's joints, joint soreness, osteoporosis, those types of things can happen. They start reabsorbing calcium into their bones. It's not a good thing. That's a whole nother webinar worth of information, but just try to keep in mind that calcium needs to be 2 parts to 1 part phosphorus. And when I mentioned alfalfa being high in calcium, I'll talk about this later with forage quality. It is very important to have it tested so that you know what you have in there. A lot of times we focus on the energy content and the protein. It's just as important to check that calcium phosphorus ratio. Next, feeding horses on a schedule is a great thing, but this is what literature has taught us: feed them the same time every day, do the same thing all the time, don't change up your schedule. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not always the best thing to do for your horses. Now, I'm not saying go skip a feed in here and there and all that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you feed, let's say you feed once in the morning, once at night. A lot of people are so strict down to I feed at 6 a.m. and then 6 p.m. Well, it really wouldn't hurt to feed maybe at 7 a.m. or 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. instead of 6, every morning. Change it up, because it reduces the stress of them anticipating feeding time. I can't tell you how many colics we've seen just stress induced. They get so used to a routine, and if that owner or that manager misses it by a hair, those horses are wigging out. They're stressed out a lot. A lot of times they end up getting kinks, pretty bad colic, kinks in their intestine. So I really want to stress that changing it up within reason is a good thing. Just because you don't make it back to feed your horses at 6 p.m., it's okay. Start getting them used to 9 p.m., 10 p.m. It's okay. It's a good thing. It reduces stress. It reduces behavioral problems too. But that don't skip feedings. That's not what that's supposed to mean. So next, check hay and concentrates for mold. We had a really bad year this year. Lot of moldy hay killing horses, moldy feeds. Horses aren't cows. This is a really big difference right here. Cattle, we've had no problem. We can feed. We shouldn't, but we can get away with it. There can be some mold on the hay, and it's not going to kill them. It's not good for them, but it's not going to kill them dead like it will a horse. Like I said, that small intestine's taking a hit. I mean, everything, the horse is not being foregut fermenters. Their intestines take in that mold right off the bat. It's no good from there. So another thing, if you feed them treats or feed them old fruit and all that, make sure it's not moldy. Again, we had some horses die this year because of mistakes like that. So very important. Next, and this is a pretty common problem. When you're feeding horses in groups, pay close attention to the pecking order and make sure they're all able to finish their meals. A lot of us have really busy lives, and we go, we feed our horses out in the pasture. They don't come in. We keep it really easy, and I'm like that too. However, it pays to wait and watch them all finish their meals. You need to make sure that all of them are actually getting what you think they're getting, especially if you have young horses that or need more nutrients, older horses, geriatric horses, performance horses, or horses that are just not doing well, and you're concerned and you're racking your brains, and you think you're feeding them enough. Well, have you watched them eat? It might pay to stay back and watch them finish their food. Make sure they are finishing their meals. Make sure they're not getting beat off their meals. Make sure they're not dropping their food. Helps to do that every now and then. Check in on things. Next, and this kind of goes along with what I just said, check teeth. Whenever you have the vet out doing your vaccinations or whatever you have to do, twice a year, get them checked. I don't mean you have to get them floated every time. There's horses that go years without it. But you need to check, because cracks are common. Cracked teeth happen. And those horses may not drop their feed. They just may not chew it down as well. And what happens if we don't chew our food well? Well, it doesn't digest well. You're not breaking it up. A common thing are hooks that develop with the horses, and then ramps. And this isn't as common, but it can happen. And this is basically where the gum starts to grow over the molar. And this is an icky thing to deal with. They won't necessarily drop their feed, but they do have a hard time eating it all. So kind of pay attention. It can save you some money too if you keep an eye on those teeth. It doesn't mean you have to let the vet float those teeth every single year. It's not that. Just have them check. Look around the mouth. Have them show you what they're looking at. It helps. That way you know what to look for, and if you see a problem, you can call vet and have it fixed. But we waste a lot of money on getting weight on horses or trying to figure out, we waste money in training too. Got horses that are not taking the bit and they're really irritated and all that. And we forget to look at something as simple as the teeth. It's a cheap problem to fix. So before you go blowing money on more feed or more training or whatever it is to make your horse happy and healthy, check those teeth. Don't forget about them. I know one thing, if I've got a cavity or if I've got something wrong, I'm not eating well. It's not happening. I'll drop weight. So it shouldn't be any different with a horse. Next, this is common sense, but I feel like I need to say it because, again, this is kind of a common problem. If you start exercising your horse, and I mean even just trail riding, you got to increase it increases their nutrient requirements, so you're going to have to feed them a little more. That's just part of it. People wonder, they start kind of doing, riding their horse 2 or 3 times a week, nothing hard, but they'll kind of drop some weight, and it is what it is. So be mindful of that. Always try to increase their feed, during that time. Another thing that kind of goes with what I was talking about earlier with horses choking, if they've previously choked, chances are they're going to choke again. And this is because usually if they choke, they may have some scar tissue left over in their esophagus from it. And so obviously scar tissue built up in the esophagus that narrows the tube, and it sets them up for, it makes them more susceptible to choking again. Choking really isn't, it's an emergency, but it's not as bad as colic, if that makes sense. Like I said, their airway is not shut off completely. It is an obstruction, but the problem is they can aspirate and they can develop pneumonia and all of those sort of things. It does need to be resolved. Sometimes we're lucky and they resolve the choke on their own. But I can go ahead and tell you, if you have a chronic choker, just one that chokes all the time, and you call the vet and it's the same old, even if you're wetting down their feed and basically feeding them soup, sometimes they're just going to choke again. And I'll go ahead and tell you right now, it'll save you some money if you go ahead and have them go in and have an endoscopy done of their esophagus. If you have a gray horse, they're known for getting melanomas in places on their bodies. Well, they can also have melanomas develop in their esophagus. So if you start noticing your gray horse, becoming a chronic choker for really no reason, this could be something that's going on with them. And I recommend going in for that endoscopy. It's not that expensive to have done. It's not incredibly cheap, but it can save you money in the long run. It'll save you money by, not having to call the vet every time your horse chokes, because maybe you can fix the problem. So it pays to know what's going on in there and kind of to see how much scar tissue is in there and stuff like that. So next, something that's great about a horse is, fat is the most efficient, safest way to add calories. Are they the most efficient animal with fat? No, they don't have a gallbladder. But it is an efficient way to put weight on a horse. It's safe. I talked about colic earlier. Colic is just basically, it's just abdominal pain. There's varying degrees of colic. There's all sorts of colic. I brought up a kink, which is basically a twist or a torsion in the intestine. But there's also impaction colics. Humans get impactions. But that, a lot of times colic can come from diet changes or carbohydrate overload. The carbohydrate overload ticks off the microbes in their hind gut, and next thing you know, you've got lactic acid release. You've got all kinds of things happening, and it leads to abdominal upset, and then now you have a colicking horse. Fat doesn't do this. You can actually start feeding fat, pretty quickly to a horse. Just a few ways to add fat on top of whatever they're getting. Again, always think about forage first, but when you're having to fill in the blanks with a supplement, if you're wanting to add some fat to it, like I said, you can go up to 20% with a horse. something simple and cheap. You can add 1 cup to 2 cups of corn oil per day on top of their feed. They will eat that just fine. Now, I will say this, in the beginning, you might notice a little bit runny, a little bit more runny manure from that horse. It's okay. It just takes them a little while to adjust. It's not going to make them colic. That's probably the one thing you'll notice the downside of fat is. But make sure they're drinking enough water when that happens. So another way you can add fat is rice bran, fat-added rice bran, the pelleted version or powder. Another thing, there's several supplements out there that are fat supplements that work just fine. So some cheap, some not so cheap. The thing is figuring out what your horse will eat. A lot of horses won't eat that corn oil. So another good option I would recommend is rice bran. There's a lot of brands out there. I think you can run down to Tractor Supply and pick up. They've got all kinds of options of fat-added rice bran. So next, something that we forget about in the wintertime, and it's a bad deal. This is the winter and kind of coming into spring while it's still cold nights. This is when we see the most impaction colics. And it all leads back to dehydration and kind of feeding overly mature forages while being dehydrated. That large intestine needs water to be able to digest and absorb what's in that hay. If they don't have enough water, if your intestines don't have enough water going to them, they get impacted. I mean, it's really simple. Well, the reason it's such an issue in the winter is because, well, I mean, do you want to drink freezing cold water while it's 20 degrees outside? No, that's not the first thing I want to do. But we need to. It's better for us. We need to be drinking water. So something to encourage horses to drink water during the winter is to add 1 or 2 teaspoons of just plain old table salt to their supplement per day. This just encourages them to drink. Now, when you go to do that, make sure that your water is, clean and safe for them to drink, and they actually do have water to drink once you give them salt, because that's just cruel. If you give me a large order of McDonald's salty French fries and then you don't give me nothing to drink, I'm going to be one unhappy camper and not feeling so good. So just use common sense there. We're getting into warmer weather, but the nights are still cold, so this is important. This fluctuating weather really sets the stage for colic and digestive problems with horses. But horses normally prefer 45 to 65 degree water, and they're going to drink about 1 gallon of water per 100 pounds of body weight. It can fluctuate from 10 gallons of water per day to 16 to even 20, depending on how much they're performing. If they're like eventers or endurance horses, they're going to consume in the upper end of that range. But you're looking at an average, though, 10 to 12 gallons per day. When temperatures reach 32 degrees Fahrenheit, horses may consume as little as 1 to 3 gallons per day. And that just goes back to what I said, it being so cold. The water's cold. It's cold outside. They're not necessarily wanting to drink. So that 1 to 2 teaspoons of salt will certainly encourage water consumption. And why is water consumption important? Well, we don't want them having impaction colics. We want their intestines to be hydrated and able to process what they're eating. So this is a huge issue for a lot of horse owners. Next, just kind of speaking of cold weather, I know we're getting out of this now, but this is just kind of important. This is when we just see the most problems, nutrition related problems with horses is during the winter. They have decreased thermoregulation. They require more food energy to maintain internal temperatures. So we have this thing called a critical temperature, and at this or below this is when they start using energy to stay warm. So consider wind chill, moisture, and coat thickness. A wet coat, critical temperature is going to increase by 10 to 15 degrees. So if they're wet and it's 55 degrees, well, now your critical temperature is at 55 degrees. So what you have to do during this time, like last night, we had it was 36 degrees here last night. That's pretty chilly. You know, we had some warm days, but we are certainly dropping during the night, and that's below their critical temperature. So in order to keep them warm or help keep them warm overnight or when it gets cold, you need to add energy to their diet. So for every 10-degree decrease below the critical temperature, horses are going to require 2 pounds of forage added. And here's kind of a simple breakdown of that. So your left column, I've got your difference in degrees below critical temperature. So 10 degrees below, you're going to add 2 pounds per day of forage. And then at 20 degrees below, we're going to add 4 pounds. So just increase by 2 pounds. Forage though. Concentrate is not going to keep them warm. Forage will. Heat of fermentation is going to keep that horse warm. So next thing that I could spend an entire webinar on, and I'm pretty sure we will here in the near future, is use of pastures. How much forage should horses consume in one day? At least 1% of their body weight. I hate saying that because I want it to be more. We need to do our very best to fill that 2.5% body weight they eat per day in forage. But do not go below that 1%. That is your minimum right there. So for them to stay healthy and live healthy. How much will a horse consume in one day? They're going to consume around 1.5 to 3.1% body weight per 24 hours. Now, this is just saying if a horse is turned out and all they're on is pasture. The intake's gonna reflect forage quality. Higher quality, the more they'll eat. And it also depends on if you're supplementing with something else, a concentrate or whatever. That will affect their intake. But if you are planning to continuously graze your pastures, we recommend not continuously grazing. We would rather you rotate grazing or strip graze. I'll get into that in a second. But if you are continuously grazing your pastures, you need at least 2 to 3 acres per horse. And this depends on forage yield. If there's nothing there, then it doesn't matter how much acreage you have. If it's a desert, well, that doesn't mean anything. It needs to be 2 to 3 acres of good quality forage per horse if you plan to continuously graze and have their diet be basically forages. So, like I said, whole webinar we could do on that one. So this kind of leads me to the forage quality section. I wanted this to be a section on its own because it is so important for horses, and we really are pushing folks to start getting serious about their pastures, fixing their horse pastures, getting higher quality hay for their horses, and knowing what it is, and knowing what quality hay is, what quality pasture is, what a healthy pasture is. It saves you money, and it helps it's for the better health of your horse. So what's forage quality? It's the extent to which a forage has potential to produce a desired animal response. So there's some factors that influence forage quality, and we don't really talk about this much in the horse world. I hear it in the beef cattle world. They're a little more mindful with this, but we're not always the target audience for learning stuff like this. So it's important to note these factors right here. So digestibility is going to affect it. If they can't digest it, it's pointless. So you need to know the digestibility on your forage, on your hay or your pasture. And that's, we'll get into forage testing in a minute, but digestibility, and then intake. Are they eating enough of it? Horses select. They select for the most nutritious thing, whether it's in the hay or out in the pasture. They're spot grazers. And it's not because they're dumb. It's because they're selecting for what's most nutritious in the pasture. The selection rate on a horse compared to a cow, a horse is 90%. They sort 90%. The cow is more to 70%. Just kind of an average. They in terms of weeds, horses typically, unless there's nothing out there for them to eat, they're not going to eat them. So they do. They're smart. They go for the most nutritious in the pasture. So same thing, if you're feeding them hay, they're going to sort through their hay for the most nutritious. So intake matters. Palatability. If they don't like it, then they're not going to eat it. If it doesn't taste good to them, they're not going to eat it. So that's important to kind of know if your horses, you know, what kind of forages they like and what kind of hay works for them. And that varies from horse to horse. I can't sit here and give you a list of forages that horses will eat, that horses won't eat, because in the same breath I can name you, you know, I've had people say horses won't eat crabgrass. Well, I have a backyard full of them that love crabgrass. So some people just experience different things with their horses. Every horse is different. So I can't give you a list of what's, you know, palatable and what's not. You're going to have to use some common sense. If they don't want to eat it, it's probably just not palatable to them. So next, nutrient content once it's digested. Are we meeting their needs, their nutrient requirements? Is the rest of the story fitting together, falling into place? Next, any quality factors. I mentioned mold earlier, trash, you know, just junk in there. Mold being one of the most important things to look out for with horses. So that's what any quality factors are. And so with hay coming with no labels, no tags, no guaranteed analysis like we're used to with our commercial feeds, you need to know how to determine forage quality as a horse person, which we tend to be pretty bad at. We tend to eyeball hay quality. And the things we might always look for is greenness, abundant leaves, lack of stems, and sweet fragrance with no trace of dust, mold, weeds, or other debris. Well, I got news. This picture we're looking at right here, this is Dennis Hancock's, 2 different forages. And, you know, the average horse person would look at this picture and tell you that forage on the right side or that hay on the right side is going to be better than the other. Well, that's actually not true. He tested both of them, and the left side tested much higher quality than the right side. So don't always rely on that. Yes, it helps kind of form a decision. It helps. You know, you don't want those inequality factors. You don't want it to stink. You don't want it to be, you know, overly mature and all those things. You want a lot of leaves. You don't want a ton of stems. But you really need to have a forage analysis done so that you can take that and then formulate the rest of your diet and do what I've been preaching this entire time. Forage is first, and then fill in the holes with your supplement. Don't go supplement and then fill in the holes with your forage just because you're trying to save money. We spend so much money on horse feed. If you sat down and did the numbers on it, we spend a lot more money on commercial feeds than we do hay. So just consider that. Also, face value does not always equal feed value. Just because that bale is $18 for a 50-pound square bale and the other one is $8 for a 50-pound square bale, just being maybe a different variety or different species, you know, don't think that just because that $18 is just because it's $18 is better than the other. You need a forage analysis on it. It'll surprise you. Unless you test, it's just a guess. So, we have a link towards the end on how to collect. It takes you to a video on how to collect a hay sample. So every county extension office has one of these probes. So you just contact your county extension agent and they can get you hooked up with a hay probe. So, and they can also help you do it too. Regional extension agents as well, sorry. Next, when you get your forage analysis back, a lot of times the horse owners get they don't know how to read it. It's going to give you moisture, and with horses, you want less than or equal to 20% moisture. Average is going to be 10 to 15. If you got greater than 30%, no, it's unpalatable and it's going to invite mold. So you don't want that. Digestible energy. This is just the estimate of the amount of calories available to the horse. There's a lot of equations that we've used in the past to determine this estimate. And there's an equation the lab uses. I don't expect you guys to use this. This isn't there's other ways to determine what your horse needs, but it is nice to know what the digestible energy is in the feed or in the hay. So if it's less than 0.775 megacalories per pound, it should not be fed to a horse because it's nearly indigestible. So kind of keep that number in your head. We want horses to have adult horse at maintenance, 16.7 megacalories per day, and that's just their digestible energy figure for that. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you know that number, you'll be okay. And obviously stay away from this. Don't let it be below 0.75. That's just not good. Okay. Next, you have neutral detergent fiber, and it's related to the intake of the forage, and it's composed of the cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin, the digestible and indigestible components. ADF, this is related to the digestibility of the nutrients, and then I'll go through a little chart that'll help supplement this in just a second. Crude protein, this is not an indication of energy availability. It indicates the level of amino acids and total nitrogen. As horse owners, we worry about crude protein. It's the first thing we worry about. And chances are that is not our limiting nutrient. It's usually energy related. So we need to pay attention to the other figures too. Crude protein is not what it's all about. So yes, it's important, but it's usually being met pretty easily. So here's just a good scale to kind of use. And I'll introduce another type of quality scale later on. But for now, quality standard, your prime hay, and then your least desirable hay is out of 5. You've got your prime, then 1 through 5. So your prime forage would be ADF. If you have a figure less than 31%, you're in the prime area. NDF less than 40%, and then crude protein greater than 19. That's good stuff. Very few horses even need that, but if you got it, good for you. That's great. But if it's just a backyard horse that you just have, and it's just a pleasure horse, and he's healthy and pretty easy keeping, you don't need this area. And then getting on down in the 1 and 2 range. The 1 range is kind of goes along with the prime. That needs to be kind of a performance horse, or a horse that you're breeding stock, or young growing horses. Coming down to the 2, again, growing horses, light work horses. The moderate work horses, I would stay with the 1 range, but 2, you're looking at your growing horses, and again, your breeding stock. 3, we're approaching maintenance. This is okay. This is good stuff right here. I'd be okay, with my horses, the backyard horses that I have, not my show horses, being in the 2 to 3 range. That's a good range to be. 4, this quality standard of a 4 has a place in the horse world. We also have a problem of overweight horses. And people often try to starve those horses. They'll put them in dry lots thinking that they're, going to keep weight off of them, when really this doesn't help. All it does is stresses them out, and it does sometimes create laminitic conditions or founder, even by starving them. So, and the next time they eat, it stresses them out, and their metabolism is completely flopped. So this quality standard of 4 has a place with our overweight, easy keeping horses, or overweight ponies, or obese giraffes, or whatever. You can find a hay that's just kind of lower quality to keep them busy. Don't starve them. Don't think dry lotting them is the way to go. They need to horses always need to have something to munch on. It's not healthy. It's not the way they're built. It's just, you're not helping them. So it's just better to go get something, maybe like Bahia, or maybe just a lower quality, grass hay. They love it. They eat it up. It has its place. So always remember that. Now in the 5, that's when you're gonna have problems with impaction colics. That's too stemmy. That's gonna be hard for them to digest. That's gonna cause more physiological problems. Maybe you do have easy keepers that get fat off air, and this would be okay. But the thing is, it wouldn't be about their weight at that point. It would be about the physiological issues that could happen. Kind of a rule of thumb I use with hay for horses: if I can't crutch take a handful of the hay and crunch it in my hand, if it hurts my hand, it's probably a little too stemmy. So imagine that. Just use common sense. They have to swallow. They have to chew and swallow that. It doesn't need to have a bunch of sharp awns or a ton of stems. So you're getting in that area when you get down to the 5. So be careful of that. Next, so I've been harping on forages. Concentrates have their purpose. I feed them to my performance horses. I feed them to my growing horses, just to supplement whatever hay I have for the year, or whatever pasture I have for the year. But again, I go back and I fill the blanks in with this concentrate. I don't form my whole diet off of the concentrate. That's where we have issues if you do that. So, the purpose of concentrates is to balance forage nutrients, first and foremost, then meet special nutrient requirements. And then oftentimes what I see is it makes the owner feel better. So you really have to ask yourself, who's it for? Is it for the horse or is it for the owner? A lot of times it just makes us feel better to keep feeding concentrates. I'm not telling you to starve your horse. I'm just telling you to go focus on your forage quality a little more and put all your money and effort and your feel good into forages first before you put your feel good into the concentrate. Physically giving a horse something every day tends to make people happy though. So I get that. But if you have an overweight horse and let's say you just want to check them over every day and you want a reason to, so they'll come up, feeding they have balancers, these things called balancers, and it's basically just vitamins and minerals, and that's fairly palatable to the horses. You can pick that up at any, a lot of these local commercial feed stores, co-ops. They've got balancers you can feed, so you can get your horses up. No need in getting something that's some sweet feed, that's high in sugars, high in carbohydrates. No reason for that. There's options out there to use as, kind of a filler and just for checking your horses every day. So problems with concentrate use is, overfeeding and then obese horses with health concerns. If he's obese and you're feeding concentrate, probably need to take a look at things and back off the concentrate and, figure something else out. Try a balancer, in addition to maybe just a kind of a mediocre, lower quality forage and go from there. And exercise the horses. So, once you've figured out what's in your forages, your pastures, your hay and everything, and if you do use concentrates, reading the feed tag, being able to is pretty stinking important. On the guaranteed analysis, you always have to have the crude protein, crude fat, crude fiber, calcium, phosphorus. They're required to have all that. Now, this is kind of a fancier feed tag. I can't say the company, but they've got a lot more added on there. This is not going to be on every feed tag that you find. This is just, some of this is marketing and some of this is they're just a higher end feed company. So notice they've got, ascorbic acid in there and biotin, and they've got the yeast culture fermentation products at the bottom. That's just, you'll see some variation in companies and what they include and what they don't want to include, but don't judge a company just because they don't do stuff like this. It's really not necessary. So, coming down to the ingredients, your first ingredient listed is the one that it is, the highest amount in the feed. So alfalfa meal, that's going to be, what makes up most of the feed. And then next you got wheat middlings and then shredded wheat pulp and so on. So check that first ingredient, to see what the bulk of it's made of. I've included a link to a good publication from our extension website about reading the feed tag. So you can go back and refer to that. So putting this all together, the concentrate and the forage side of things, here's some requirements above maintenance. I'll talk about a horse at maintenance in a second, which I feel like I have most of the day, but these are kind of special cases, your pregnant horses, your lactating horses, and then your growing horses. So this is kind of where I would focus more on the crude protein a little bit. We do want to make sure that we are meeting these horses' requirements because they are, either producing or they're growing. So your first trimester of pregnancy, you only need about 9 to 10% for those brood mares. So that's maintenance. This first line right here, this pregnant first trimester, that matches an adult horse at maintenance. So just keep that in mind. Notice I have the lysine and then the calcium phosphorus requirements as well. Moving on down, it bumps up a little bit. Second trimester, kind of to around 11, 12%. And then third, we're getting in the 13, 14 range. And once they're lactating, that's when you kind of kick it up. That first month of lactating is going to be where you really need to kick things up between 14 and 16%. And then you can kind of get away with 12.5 and 12%. I keep mine on the 14 and 16 the entire time. It saved me from having to help fix their diet or adjust their diet. I'd rather just go ahead and give them all they need through lactation, because some mares have a hard time through it and they're not as easy keepers. So I just like to err on the side of caution. Growth, you're going to bump it up a little more for these growing babies, 16% for the 4-month-old. As they approach 6 months and then yearling age, you're going to be in the 12, 13 range. It's okay to get up to 14, obviously. Use common sense here. You don't have to feed exactly 13. That's just kind of in the middle of your range. So getting on up to 18 months, you can start trickling down to that 10%, that maintenance area. So, and notice the calcium phosphorus ratios are all the 2-part and 1-part. Remember the 2-part and then 1-part rule. So now, kind of the weight management thing. This is important for people that have geriatric horses, have performance horses, have horses with health conditions that affect their weight, or have just poor doers, or overweight horses. Whatever it is, this is important for you guys. It's important to know the body condition score on your horse. And again, that's another webinar, that could be put on. I included a link to a chart on body condition score. It's a really easy to understand chart. This is just a system to gauge, is your horse in good flesh? Is your horse of healthy flesh, or is he obese, or is he underweight? So this is a good system to use. It's not the only system to use, but it's definitely a good support system. Next, you want to have a weight estimate on your horse. In that body condition score publication, they have a way to estimate weight using body tape on a horse. Very, very easy. They go through the motions in that publication. So you can check that out. Also, a lot of vet clinics, like if you haul your horse then to the vet, they have scales and all that you can put your horse on to actually get the real weight. But not all of us have that luxury, so the weight tape works pretty stinking good. Obviously, knowing the weight of your horse is important, because what I say earlier, when it comes to feeding them, we're feeding by weight. We need to be matching 2.5% of their body weight. So in order to do that, we need to know how much they weigh. So very important. Next, keep dental records, kind of when the last time that mouth was looked at. It's good to do this because you can show the vet, like, hey, look, I just did this 6 months ago and we're already having problems. Maybe there's something else I'm missing. Keep records of everything you do, because I'm telling you, it saves you a battle, and it saves the vet from having to, run multiple tests and all that. They can go back and say, oh, okay, well, let's try something else, instead of beating their heads against the wall. Keep records. Next, know your temperature, pulse, and respiration for your horse, that like the normal one, when he's at rest, when he's happy, when he's healthy. Know the temperature, pulse, and respiration on it. So this just helps to know when something's going wrong. Like if they're colicking, usually their temperature and their pulse, everything rises, and you want to be able to know you want to know what's healthy for your horse to be able to gauge if something's wrong. So very important. Takes 2 seconds to do. So it's not hard. Deworming strategy, kind of have a record of that, what you do every year. Take pictures Take pictures of your horse. Take good pictures. When you go back and look at this publication, the body condition score instructions, you'll see pictures of every scored horse take pictures that mimic those types of pictures. Get the side view of the horse so that we can see the ribs, the withers, their hip. Don't take just goofy pictures of their heads. I mean, take a good picture from the side and the front and the hind so that you can see their muscles and the flesh that they're in. This is good for your vet. This is good for you. If you start spending money on a supplementation program and you want to see if it works, you need to take pictures. It will save you in the long run, because sometimes our eyes just play tricks on us and we think we're doing the right thing and we're not. So take pictures, especially nowadays with these smartphones. There's no reason why you can't go out the back door or go down wherever your horse is and snap a picture real quick. Next, keep feed records. Again, this kind of helps the vet. If you were to run into a colic situation or choke, whatever it is, it's easy just to hand the vet your records, because they got to ask you all this anyway. You might as well have it written down somewhere. It just saves you later on. So again, with the teeth, having the teeth checked, I'm not saying have the horse's teeth done twice per year. I'm saying check them. So there's a difference. Very important note with teeth. This has a huge deal to do with nutrition, so I had to include it in there. As teeth continue to grow throughout a horse's life, at some point as they age, they actually just become more sloping and horizontal. So they're less efficient at biting down and tearing fibrous feeds and things like that. So and therefore they become a little bit harder keepers. So keep an eye on those. And then dental hooks come on molars. And this is just an issue for all horses. This isn't necessarily an age problem. It just happens. It's when their diets change, they develop hooks on the molars. It's not particularly painful, but it limits their chewing ability. So those can be fixed pretty easily by a veterinarian or equine dentist. Next, broken or missing teeth. This is missed often. A lot of times we focus and narrow in on looking for hooks or any abnormalities in the teeth, and we miss a cracked tooth. And that's really painful for that horse. And if you start having problems, don't rule it out. Check for it. Also, if a molar or premolar is lost, the opposing teeth will grow into the space. And this creates a wave mouth. And I've got a good picture of this. So this top picture is an example of a hook. You can see where that would get in the way for the bottom teeth and hit the gum on the bottom lower jaw every time he chews or grinds. This bottom picture is just a severe wave mouth. That can't really be fixed. What's done is done right there. That creates some chewing problems. It's not a good thing. That does happen quite often in aged horses. And it happens if you're having your horses floated too much. Keep an eye on that. Sometimes we get a little dentist happy and we start floating our horse's teeth a little too often, and that can happen. That can cause wave mouth as well, so be careful. Next, another thing to consider, if you have a hard-doing horse or a horse that just doesn't seem right and you're pouring all this money into their nutrition program, and there's a couple things that you need to look at first before you start dumping money into it, and that's teeth. And then next is the parasite issue. It's pretty cheap to have through the vet school or your local vet clinic. A lot of vet clinics in our state, they'll do fecal egg counts just like they do dogs. They can do it on horses, and they can tell you the range, what's healthy and what's okay. And if your horse is overloaded with it, this is a good way to know. This is a good way to tell. You got a number on it, so get that done. It's fairly cheap, and then go from there. We have a lot of parasite resistant problems right now. So if you're using the same wormer over and over again, gone are the days of deworming horses, every 2 months. We're not doing that anymore. We're not recommending that anymore. We created resistant problems and parasites. So some of those dewormers are not working anymore. So be mindful of that too. If their coat's pretty poor and they're just becoming poor doers, you may want to have a fecal egg count done. And, if your dewormer doesn't seem to be working, this is where it's important. That way you can test and see, find a new product and see if it works. Right now is a good time to be deworming with moxidectin. It's that time of year. So if you're having an issue and you can't get a fecal egg count right now. Right now is a good time to do moxidectin. So now with that, that's pretty much all I have for nutrition, horse nutrition for today. I wanted to quickly tell y'all about a couple events coming. We've got a couple of horse pasture workshops coming to the Tennessee Valley Research and Extension Center, and then the Gulf Coast Research Extension Center. The first workshop, the Tennessee Valley workshop, will be June 2nd, and then the Gulf Coast workshop will be June 16th. So make plans to come on out there. We'll have more information available very, very soon. And another thing that's very exciting, a new equine forage test is coming to Auburn. We will be able to test carbohydrates. It's also going to include some more educational information on there for horse owners. And the test is going to read more for a horse owner. Right now, it's more for beef cattle owners and such. So this will be a great thing. It's coming this month. So keep a lookout for that. And with that, I guess we're finished here. Any questions?
All right. Thank you, Courtney, for your presentation. Are there any questions? Okay. If there's no additional questions, then we will be posting the archive of this presentation on alabamabeefsystems.com. So if you're viewing this and have additional questions, you can contact Courtney directly at her email address below. So with that, we appreciate your participation in the March 2018 webinar. We would encourage you to come back and join us in April. I'm going to be visiting with everybody a little bit about mineral nutrition for beef cattle, and specifically looking at our forage systems and what type of mineral profile our forage systems provide us, and then how we can select appropriate supplements for our beef cattle based on forage analysis. So with that, I thank you for your participation today and would encourage you to come back and join us in April. Thank you.